That's what we were, Senator Sears and I asked the Secretary of the President's office, why the bill got referred here, and that's what we were told. And I'm just trying to find the section on the
Section
sunset.
25.
25.
On page 18. Is the creation of the commission, and then
I don't see a sunset.
I don't think we put that in.
Maybe it's in the.
Did you amend the bill at all?
Yeah,
You did?
but only by asking the superior judge. So maybe that's why we didn't, we extended it in a different bill. And
We did the,
so the reason it's in here, we didn't extend it in this bill, we extended it in
The sunset, you mean?
the sunset, but because the commission is mentioned in here, that's why, I guess.
so it wouldn't be in here because of the fee changes.
No, that's
No.
finance. These are finance.
No, the only, there's two legislators on here, the chair of Senate Judiciary and the chair of House Judiciary. And I guess they want to get paid.
So we think that it,
On page
Two.
23, you have a
Two
date
total,
being
two
bumped out.
total
23,
legislators.
Yeah, bottom of page 23, sunset extensions.
Oh, yes, it is in
It
here,
is.
thank you.
okay, so that's why. So it's
Oh, yeah, yeah.
in not having this Senate commission
Right.
sunset July 20, and moves it for another year.
So it's to pay the chair of House Judiciary.
And,
Senate chair doesn't care if he gets paid or not.
well, that's very
What
generous.
about the public person?
Hmm?
The public person and get paid.
There isn't. They're all,
Public.
On the commission,
Yeah, right at the end.
well, I suppose a member of the member of the public appointed by the governor, I suppose.
could be right.
And a member of the bar association.
So, but obviously, we're accommodating those expenditures now. Commission
Yeah.
exists, we're not creating it, we're extending it. So I think the impact is, by the extension is minimal. So do you want to make a motion, Senator Ruth?
Yeah, given that the cost is de minimis, I would move that we pass the bill favorably.
Okay. Second. Second, Al. So the bill has, motion been made to move the bill favorably, made by Senator Brewer, seconded by Senator Nitka. If there's no further discussion, we'll call the roll.
Senator Nitka.
Yes.
Oops, sorry. Senator Bennett. Senator Pruitt, yes. Senator Nitka.
Yes.
Senator Sears.
Yes.
Senator Stover. Yes. Senator West. Yes. Senator Kitchen.
Yes.
Okay. And Senator Sears reported?
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. So the REACH program, do we have the presenter?
Senator Cummings was just grabbing something for lunch and then she's going to come right in. Do you want to go to Senator Collmore on the boards and commissions?
Why don't we do that?
Okay, let me grab it. Excuse me. And just a reminder, we're going to remain live.
Let's say, actually, you're probably the one most likely to say something. Back.
Philip, do you want to go to the chair's meeting at 4:30?
Are you gonna be going home?
Yeah, I'll be on the road.
Sure, I'll show up.
All we're doing is the deeds and the
Yeah.
forfeiture and the.
Senator Collmore, welcome.
Thank you, okay.
So we're-
Civil forfeiture.
Yeah, so it's just,
I don't think anybody cares, except for the president.
All right, so
Today's and
Senator,
deeds.
Senator Cullimore is here to present H 465. And there's no fiscal impact here. So if you just want to give us a quick run through of what this bill does, I think it perhaps could have some impact on per diems, but is it immediate or is it, there's some examination in advance? So that would be helpful if you could just help us understand the sequence here.
Certainly, Madam Chair. For the record, Senator Collin from the Rutland District. So the bill was generated from work done basically this summer and fall from what's known as the Sunset Advisory Council. It's made up of 2 senators, 2 House members, and 2 gubernatorial appointees. And basically what we do is take a look at all the boards and commissions that currently exist and decide whether they're still meeting, whether there's still a purpose, and if not, we delete them. And so there'll be 7 boards and commissions that we will be reporting that we repealed and in essence sunsetting them. The other thing that is in the bill, because by statute, we're also asked to look at per diems. So what we thought might make sense, and I'll just read from page 11 of the bill. Per diem compensation authorized under this section for members of boards, commissions, councils, and committees, and all other management, policymaking, or advisory bodies, including temporary study commissions of the executive branch, whether appointed by the governor or not, shall not be less than $50 per day and shall be approved pursuant to this subsection. What we want them to do is the annual budget report of the governor submitted to us in the General Assembly would contain a separate schedule by entity that provides the per diem compensation rate established for the current fiscal year and the per diem rate proposed for the next fiscal year. So in essence, if a board or commission fell under, for instance, AHS, they would have a line item in their budget that says, here's what the per diems will be for the boards and commissions under our jurisdiction. The feeling was that there might be a little bit more oversight and therefore accountability of the way that we organize per diems, rather than just have a flat $50, which is what it is now, process with, in essence, kind of nobody paying attention to it sort of thing. We do have a fiscal note.
Yeah, right here.
Done by Stephanie Barrett, who is here.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm sure she can speak to. So what you're saying is for fiscal year, this is 23, so for fiscal year 24,
Yes.
proposing to give the agencies, was there discussion about the fact that, I don't know, I guess we would look to the administration to make sure that you don't have one agency that is very generous and giving per diems of $500 a day, and another saying you get 50. I mean, in other words, there could be, this could result in great disparity between how individuals are compensated across state government depending on the the thinking of a particular agency.
Mm-hmm. First, I'll just make note that we did bump out the effective date till July 1st, 2023, so that the fiscal 24 year would be the first one that would be impacted. The other thing I'll mention is I don't believe we've changed the per diem rate since 1986. So there was some pressure that we take charge of that in the Sunset Advisory Commission, but we didn't feel like we wanted to do that. We wanted, as I mentioned, each agency to sort of be responsible for their own boards and commissions.
So, Senator,
This just tacks onto the chair's question in a different form. Bottom of page 11, there's a floor established.
Eat your lunch and we'll come and get you, hopefully you'll shoot fast.
So there's a floor established at $50 a day. Am I right that there's no upper limit? I'm just wondering, was there a discussion of whether to do that?
Yeah, we took some testimony. I don't believe there's anything right now in a board or commission that's under the 50. I think everybody's at 50. Right?
No, that I think is, uncontroversial. I'm thinking about, you're giving everybody the power to raise it, but without a guideline as to what
An
the
upper
outer.
limit, you said a lower, but upper.
Yeah, we did talk about it, but we didn't come to any firm decision about
At
it.
this point, there is not one, you didn't put one in.
No.
Stephanie has a.
So I did, the sponsors of the bill in the House, I did ask them that question, because they would want to consider the ceiling as well, and they did not want to do that. They thought that would just sort of automatically move everyone up to that ceiling very quickly. That was their thinking and not setting an absolute ceiling of the per diem. The idea of having the schedule very clear every year in the governor's budget proposal for what is being paid right now in the current budget year and what is proposed for the next budget year is to make those changes transparent. So if an agency is ratcheting up a per diem for a particular board or commission over time, you are seeing that in that annual process, and you're seeing it in the budget presentation. That's the thinking behind
Yeah,
it.
understood. I'm just thinking of a number of bills that have come through judiciary, and you've all seen versions of them too, where the argument is that people with lived experience, people who are living in poverty, people who are at the lower end of maybe the socioeconomic ladder, should be paid more in order to incentivize their joining these boards and commissions, in which case our argument has always been there's a standard rate. So I don't know if there's no upper limit established, how do we respond if they say in order to do this work with these folks, we're going to need per diems?
I think this is gonna throw it right onto the executive branch.
Yeah.
The governor and the finance and management are gonna have to evaluate what is being proposed and the rationale behind it. Because it says the governor may authorize per diem compensation expenditure in G. Is that overarching, Stephanie? What words, the annual report reflects it, but what are they reflecting, what the governor authorized?
It's supposed to reflect what is being, what's authorized right now, and Ameren is up on.
Yeah, I see, Aaron, maybe you can answer the question. The concern is, if we don't put in an upper limit payment, then we are really relying on the executive branch to vet the recommendations from the various agencies and boards and commissions or any activity subject to the per diem. Does that mean that those agency of human services versus ANR versus whatever they propose would have to be authorized by the governor in G?
For the record, Ameren Aberdaily Legislative Council. So subsection G is specific to those boards and commissions that are established by executive order, because the presumption is that these boards and commissions may be established out of sync with the legislative process. They may occur at any time of year.
Limited.
So this is just specific to those boards and commissions created by executive order, so that there can be an initial per diem for those, and then those per diems would be reviewed as part of the budget process, along with all of the other boards and commissions in subsection E.
So
What is the upper limit?
there isn't one.
There isn't.
Well, somebody must be paying somebody.
Well, we're paying $50. Everybody gets 50.
Unless we've established it slightly differently in statute somewhere.
Well, it's eliminating members of the parole board, which get $100.
Yeah, so they get
The community broadband board, I think it's $250.
So somebody else is getting $250.
So we already have some disparate treatment now.
I see a disparity on the other end from where Phil was talking about the low income people. I also see it, the governor might appoint some high powered lawyer to some commission and they say, well, he's normally getting $500 an hour, so we're gonna give him something comparable, in order for him to serve over here. I just think it's kind of strange.
Senator Russman.
I hate to go, be personal, but when I sit in the chair and for 3 to 4 days ahead of a Human Rights Commission meeting, Joan sits there and reads for 3 or 4 days, 300-page documents to go through that, and then she gets $50 for a day. And there's no pay before she gets there. And I think, I understand the concern about the upper limit right now, but I think that at $50 across human rights, the Human Services Board, when you're hearing a case where somebody's been denied some sort of service and we ask people to do very hard things and we don't pay it. You know, to be quite frank, we don't pay squat.
Well, the question becomes one of, we're giving flexibility, recognizing that work is very different depending on the board or commission. And the other is the ultimate review on this should be the agency of administration in the budget process. And I don't know internally whether the administration is going to instruct agencies whether they would go forward and implement something. And it was only when they do the preparation of the budget that finance and management would discover that they've got some real outliers, and they might be for very justifiable, and they might be simply because we know, depending on the person making the decisions, they can be more generous or very stingy, and then you end up with very disparate treatment. So the question should be whether there should be any kind of review of approval by the agency of administration if they're proposing per diems, above the minimum, and maybe there's something like that. Senator Blue.
Senator Collmore, correct me if I'm misunderstanding, but we would, in the course of things, a bill would be generated with a new board. It would go through the process. Typically, it lands here last, and we talk about it with the understanding that it's $50 a person unless they're otherwise compensated. Is the new procedure would be, it would come here, but we wouldn't know how much we were authorizing. Because it would be only ex post facto that they would decide on the rate.
I believe that's true.
So that's
So perhaps in the future, under this flexibility, we would require them to specify if it's going to be more than the $50.
Yeah.
That would have to be part of the bill.
Well, I'm wondering, obviously we're late in the game, but this seems like, a situation that would be ripe for, call it a 3-tier system with $75 at the bottom or $100 at the bottom, and then a couple of grades, and then you could put in the bill, this is going to be a tier 2 per diem or whatever. But personally, I'm not comfortable voting for this, and then every single bill that comes to us for the board, we're going to be ignorant about what it actually costs, which I think that's giving away our appropriation.
I think that what we would require, if a new commission got created, that when that bill came to us, there would have to be a clear articulation if the per diem amount is going to be more than the 50. And I think that would be just part of the budget process when we're reviewing anything new.
Could we amend this bill to say that? I would feel more comfortable about that if that was going to be an established process.
I would feel, I feel like we'd have control over something new because we'd be looking at it and authorizing it new from the start. Where I'm concerned about is where we've got all this disparate view of this board is so important or the work is so important or so much more complicated. Our people deserve 500 and somebody else gets 200. And I would like to have some kind of before an agency can simply depart from that minimum standard, that there be some kind of internal review by the agency of administration if there's a proposal to. So if to establish a higher rate and a justification of why that rate is necessary. Is that possible to write up something like that, Amber?
I'm
I
sorry.
know it's possible. You can write up anything.
I'm sorry. Would you repeat the key points of that? I was
I think what
thinking
we're
about language.
saying is to wait until the annual budget report to have a separate schedule. We want to have some kind of review mechanism at the beginning before a higher reimbursement is per diem is being authorized by an agency. And that our concern is disparate treatment and the justification for differential reimbursements depending on the board, and having some requirement at the front end that any department or agency proposing to increase the per diem for $50 would be submitted to the agency of administration for review and approval. So one is reporting after the fact and the other is looking at it. And once it's in place, it's very hard to alter.
I see. So the language as it stands in subsection, in subsection E says that the $50 or the per diems not less than $50 per day shall be approved pursuant to the subsection. And then you hear in 1 and 2, and I believe the idea was that the per diems would not be, the new per diems for the next fiscal year would not be approved until they've been reviewed as part of the budget process. But if that is not clear from this language, and this language has evolved over its time in the House as well as in the Senate slightly. So perhaps that needs to be clarified. I mean, I see a couple of points that have been brought up in committee discussion today. First, that what is the process for when a new board or commission is created in one fiscal year? How does that relate to the budget process or the budget bill that is occurring in that same year? When would those per diems be effective? And then this additional question of, is the intent of this legislation to say that the governor is proposing what the per diem shall be for the next fiscal year and the General Assembly is approving those per diems? Or is the governor reporting what the per diems are and the General Assembly does not need to approve them other than ensure that those per diems are within the schedule and that there is transparency as to what those per diems are?
There's no schedule anymore. All there is the $50.
What if we put in something?
I mean, it says contain a separate schedule, but that amount is whatever is determined by the administering entity. It's not as though if somebody talked about tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 kind of, so you got, if the determination is the intensity of the work, the labor involved, et cetera, would fall into tier 3. Should that stay rather than a flat, it should be a flat 200. Or I think what we're concerned about here is it says it provides established for the current fiscal year and what is proposed for the next fiscal year. So it seems like they could advance a higher per diem earlier than the budget submission, and it's just reporting what they've done. So I think that's sort of one of the concerns here. Senator Bruce.
I was gonna say, if you're the governor and the administration, this bill passes, I would think there's only one rational way to approach it, which is you would internally create a schedule that has a low fee and then maybe a higher fee, or maybe 3 steps. But I don't understand why we're leaving it to the executive branch to do that. Yeah, why aren't we doing that? Because the system can't be sustained if there's no upper limit, because you'll just get endless variation.
You get creep. You okay?
Yeah, it's, and apologies to the reporter, because I knew you guys worked hard on this, but it's without an upper limit, it's purely discretionary, and that just seems to guarantee difference over time.
And can I ask another
Yes,
question?
go
So
ahead.
it's talking about expense reimbursement as well. Is there the thought, Brian, that the expenses would also vary in terms of the amount you get paid for mileage? It looks like it does here. In other words, somebody would get 28.5, somebody gets 58.5.
No, that does not happen.
No, that's
But
good, but-
the expenses are simply, like, in the pandemic era, expenses are very low, people aren't traveling.
Right.
This was just from the budgetary point of view, so when you're getting your budget documents, the department by department, in addition to the per diem information,
Yes.
you're getting the cost of the board and commission's expenses as well. And you will see those come back higher as we come out of the pandemic, as people meet in person.
Yeah, but I mean, so the individual mileage. thing-
Yeah, there's no variation,
That's not,
That's not discretionary.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good.
Well, committee, do we want to see if there's some kind of additional language that we could put in, requiring the administration to propose, I don't know, per diem schedule or
Do you want
a
to put in an
process?
upper limit?
What?
You want to put in an upper limit?
I think people are feeling that
Yeah.
there should be an upper limit.
Should,
But everybody probably will move right away to the upper limit, so we don't have that. in mind.
Stephanie, when you did your fiscal notes, did you have?
So I had a lot of, so I looked at, we could get 3 years of data out of the system of the state on what per diems have been in the 3 most recent fiscal years, and they're variable because of the pandemic a bit, but we seem to land at around that $300,000 a year, and that's,
But I mean, did you have in your calculation an upper limit?
I had in a 2-year, we would actually double the average to $100 a day very quickly. The continued upward pressure after that is there as well.
So your
So you're
expenditure,
right now, you're approving a budget that has a lot of per diems of $50 a day embedded in them in
Right.
FY '23. And the idea is that the possibility for the administration to change that midstream in the middle of '23, I believe is there with this bill now, if it passed. But you would see that in the first submission of that schedule next January from the administration. You would see the list of all the boards and commissions by department and what their per diem rate is for '23 and what the proposed per diem rate is for '24. And that was meant to, from the proposers in the House where this bill started, that was their check on understanding what's happening, but leaving it up to the individual departments was their viewpoint of what they wanted to accomplish.
and I can understand why they would like total flexibility, but total flexibility is going to lead to an equity across the, depending on the mindset of one versus the other. So department versus the other, because we're already hearing that. Natural Resources were saying their work was so intense that they wanted to. And I think your estimated range is 300,000. That's just for the per diems, not expenses.
No, the expenses are just gonna flow the way they
Okay.
will, it's, as people meet the way they meet.
If I could just mention one more, there's an
I just
amendment.
need to make sure we don't have more than capacity in this room, because we have joint fiscal staff that have had COVID, and many of us have already been exposed to COVID. And we've got lobbyists who have 13. Yeah. We're okay, all right. We're gonna have to watch it because we're finding that we can't be kind of as complacent as we might have been in the last couple of weeks. I am really of the view that to react after it's been done makes it very difficult, and that there should be some kind of a review and justification, and that the administration really needs to set that up so that we aren't having wide disparity, and that any agency that wants to have a very high per diem has to put forward a justification as to why that level of reimbursement is warranted. Maybe it's because of the technical expertise that you're requiring, you know, whether it's legal or whether it's engineering or environmental or whatever. And then the question is, back to, do you want an upper limit? Or should we just say the administration's review and the requesting department to have a justification that it's being submitted would be sufficient without creating that standard, which the concern was everybody's gonna move to that standard.
The other approach is you could not have it, you could not allow a movement in 23, obviously, because of and then you would see it in the submission.
As proposed.
Yeah, but, and then you want the justification before that, even before it's proposed in the budget.
Personally, I would go for an upper limit. And if you want to apply the upper limit, as the chair said, you have to make a justification, just like on your expense fund. If you spend more than $6 for lunch, you have to have a reason that you put in. This would be a version of that, but
Inflation.
you know, if the upper limit was $200 and the bottom limit was 100, I don't think that the administration is going to immediately put everybody up to $200. I think the reverse would be true. Most people would be at the new lowest figure, but they would make a justification argument here or there. And I personally, I would prefer that kind of language to be added here.
Other comments?
I mean, I actually think it's better than that. They have, in other words, if they're going over $50, they have to justify it, and it can go up to, and I would put in a cap.
Okay. So you vote for a cap. Anyone else?
Well, I think we should be setting the upper limit. I mean, you know, bureaucrats,
But how do you, all right, so what would, on what basis would we determine what that upper limit should be? And, or should we ask GovOps if they want to recommend that we're feeling, to have it open-ended, would they recommend an amount that moves the 50 up to an amount not to exceed, and that I still would like to, at least as we're doing this, have some review, just like that position creation pilot, for example, had review and approval, and
And would you ask for a justification to move up from the base?
yes,
Yes, okay.
Okay, I think Amber heard all that.
okay, thank you very much.
With us, yeah, thank you.
If you put the reporting in, you may want to, since this doesn't take effect until July 2023. you may
And
wanna
maybe the
have
language
report actually
that we're
take
talking
effect
about,
this
so that it doesn't
January.
come
This is
from
the
us.
So
reason
that you
why.
actually get it in
And
advance.
about how to invoke the justification.
The current rates.
The current rates or proposed rates?
When you get the 24 budget, you're before July 1st, 2023. And so you may want, in order for the administration to give you that report for the 24, you need that to be ahead of the effective date of this.
Well, that is fine, Stephanie. I still would like to have assurance that there's an internal review procedure, that we're just not giving individual departments. I'm concerned about the disparity.
Yeah, I'm just saying that you won't get a report this coming January
No.
with this effective date. Do you want one, even though it should be showing mostly $50 a day on both years?
Well, if we're in the FY 2024 budget, if they want to propose higher per diems, and it's part of the governor's review and a proposal, I haven't got a problem with that, in the sense that it's already having to be vetted, and they're having an opportunity to deal with some internal dissonance, if that in fact is what should happen. So,
What about those boards and commissions that are already professional boards?
you mean in OPR?
But we have, you already have the Green Mountain Care Board, and you have certain, they're separate, right?
They get salaries, so they're board members. Like it-
Yeah.
Right.
So anyone who's
Candidate
salary.
control.
Yeah.
Let's see if we can work up something, and I'm really concerned that this could be, I've had so much experience, policies being implemented like in different, district offices, and one is very liberal and one is very, whatever, and it's not fair. And then people will say, my God, I'm on this board and I'm spending 10 hours a day, reading.
Well, look at
And-
schools then.
Well,
I mean, different all over the state and all for good reason.
Yeah.
Ask any board, they can justify why they're doing what they're doing, but it's just. you
so
wind up with
I
this
think you're
crazy-
getting the sentiment of the committee in terms of not having an open process, leaving it up to the discretion of each individual agency or department, and some kind of review, and are concerned for equity and consistency.
Very much, Madam Chair. I will take that back. Senator White is the chair of the Sunset Advisory Commission, so
Oh, she is.
she is. And I appreciate your,
Thank you.
thank you.
Ryan.
Thanks.
Would you like me to get Senator Hines?
Yes, I'm just looking at the time. Which I can't see the clock anymore, and it's no.
Oh,
1:45.
it's quarter off, yeah.
Here, senators.
I might be able to send
Oh,
it.
here's the vote for the crows.
There's about 100 of them.
Vote for the crows.
I've got so many programs.
Save the crows or pro or anti-crow?
That's all.
Pro crow.
How do you tell the difference between a rabbit and a crow? Huh?
I don't know.
One has,
Both the
one has,
raven and the
one
wolf.
has, you can see the wings, the wings tell you the difference.
Wait for the punchline, Bobby.
Somebody is
I
finding.
didn't tell
I don't know
them.
where the money's coming
Their wings
from.
look like a lot.
How did you go?
So you
Well,
mean,
I
you mean
support
somebody might think there should be
universal
raven?
free tuition. It's our state college system. I'd like to be on record as saying I support it, whether I can find one day.
Well, this is the $100 million food.
Yeah.
plan.
Oh, this is just.
I wanna know who's
Money they're
paying for
spending on
those.
this.
I
is
wanna know
awful.
who's paying for that.
Who's paying for
If we
that?
put anything out, it'd have to have our name, address, and telephone number.
Those are full.
They're
There's a
full.
lot in there.
Oh, I know, but the other thing is they've been doing those expensive mailings. I think I have a couple of them here on my desk.
Just,
Like, we do
100-year
for a campaign, and they're quite large and they're very expensive. We all know that from campaigning.
Somebody's campaigning,
Well, I think the other thing that we're looking at, and I realize our education committee is a subject of great pressure, but we know, and we're hearing from all our superintendents, we think there's a $41 million price tag to deal with the PCB testing. And
At
so we
least.
have a committee that's saying, it's not a matter of the merits. As we've been saying, the question is, what will be your priorities relative to.
You know, the thing that came to me, I think early this morning, is that if we have another recession, this is the first time that the ed fund will not be protected because there is not the mandatory transfer. So if we have a problem, sales tax will probably be the first thing to sink, and that is going to hit
Property tax.
property taxes front and center.
Right.
So those are just messy.
I know, it's,
Well, the first.
Makes us so exciting.
The first thing that usually tanks in a recession is income taxes. So the general fund is gonna be
You're gonna
hard
get-
pressed to open.
Yeah,
and let's face it, consumer taxes are great because those are usually discretionary expenditures. So,
They voted on it today, and it just,
We did?
the House voted on the $29 million school meals package.
all right, well, it's got a lot of.
They're gonna find out next year how to pay for it next year.
That's nice.
Oh, I think the hard thing is, for most people in the general public,
They don't understand.
they conflate universal meal with kids that are very poor. And I understand the desire and the merit, and I think we all would say, gee, if we were doing such great things in other places, but when we've got children who are abjectly poor, under reach of, getting 800 or whatever a month, and many of them living in motels, some of us sort of are in the position of where is the need most acute? Where are the children most at risk of hunger? And so it's the general public, when we've gone out, what are they telling us? We're concerned about housing. We're concerned about workforce. We're concerned about broadband. We're concerned about the cost of sending our kids to college. The public hasn't exactly said this is where the highest priority. It's not that it doesn't have merit. The question for those of us who sit on this committee is that we see every competing expenditure and a complete package. And the question becomes one of where you would put that first dollar. And we've got the PCB because we want to protect kids and have them in a safe school environment.
And just to put some numbers to the PCB, Burlington now is talking about $190 million to replace the high school, plus the $3 million that we use to transfer them to the downtown site. So that's almost $200 million for one school because of the PCB test. So we're going to start mandatory testing here in the next year. And if we don't have some remediation fund, we're derelict
But the testing that Burlington did was by the old testing requirement.
True.
Which was
The
a lot
estimate right now
different
is 41 million right now. That's what we're getting from our superintendent. So
So
the price tag is,
lot less.
I think they look pretty good.
I'm also getting emails about we should do this with the least disruption. I think they're looking at Burlington and saying, schools have been disrupted enough by COVID, which pretty much means you're gonna have to do it all in the summer.
You're
Unless
buying
we
an
really want to
education.
disrupt the classes. That puts more pressure on.
and I understand that. And I guess when you go back and you think, when we have public forums, what are we hearing? Where are Vermonters' top priorities? And so this is where we've had to come in and set priorities. And sometimes in policy areas, you're looking at your one piece, but there's tremendous spending pressure out there. As we know, we also know the capital needs for improvement, roofs that leak, water systems that are not up to snuff, and really, where do you want to spend your money and where do you want to use your taxing capacity? Because that's basically what's at issue here. And that is, we don't want this to fall to the property tax. So we're going to create or use other taxing capacity, which makes those funds not available for something else. And so this is going to be a very difficult discussion, but there's obviously, I guess I haven't checked my mail, but I would assume we all would be the beneficiary of that.
They just delivered that to me.
Okay.
They're so
And
nice.
there's multiple things inside each one of those envelopes.
What do you mean multiple things?
different cards. from
Different cards.
So,
So anyway,
so we have to make the best funding decisions we can. And now we're talking about the Reach Up program,
yes.
which if we really want to talk about families and children who are in abject poverty, we would go to the Reach Up program. And nobody's saying raise any more money so that we can give these families a decent level of support. And so this is the, I'm channeling former Senator Ash, who said, where are the voices for the people who are the most vulnerable in the state? And how do we make their voices heard? Because they don't necessarily have the paid advocacy and the paid lobbyists. So this is a program that, and to put this in perspective, the recent appropriations, 27 million, support, what is it, about 5,000 families, Stephanie? something like that. And each family has on the average of 1.5 children. So we're talking about 7,000 to 8,000 children who are living in households with monthly income based on the Reach Up grant, which is the old financial aid to needy families, maybe $800 a month. So, I think
8:30, we were told.
830.
8:30, that's what we were told.
And that's to pay rent, that's to buy clothes, that's to pay utilities, any fuel. And so I think most people would have no idea, if you're looking at what is the demand and where is the pressure. So this bill has to do with changes to the Reach Up program. I don't think it does anything with fundamental standard of need, but it does provide some income exclusions for parents who work.
Right. What it raises the age of dependent children who are full-time students from 19 to 22, recognizing that we really are encouraging those students to go through and get advanced, either college degrees or, some kind of advanced training. You don't want a kid dropping out of school because it means their family isn't going to be able to eat because they've hit the age of 19 and have another semester to go. It increases the monthly unsubsidized earned income disregard. That's the amount you can earn before we start cutting back on your $800 from $250 to $350. It increases the disregard.
So the disregard, it used to be like the first 50 and a third of the remainder. Is this a flat disregard now, or is it a percentage?
This is a flat disregard.
That we don't have a percentage of the remainder?
I'd have to double check.
Do you know that, Nolan?
They're not.
What?
It's not.
It used to be the old was 30 and a third. The first $30 and a third of the remaining earnings were excluded from the calculation.
And I don't remember any discussion of a third. I just, it upped it from 250 to 350.
Well, maybe it's a flat deduction.
Maybe a part of that.
And then child support, if you're fortunate enough to get it.
Yeah, if you get it, it increases the pass-through from $50 to $100. So all of that is really geared towards putting some more money in these families' pockets and money that they have discretion. We don't have discretion with SNAP or 3 Square, food stamps. You can't buy toilet paper or diapers, we found out.
No, you can't. You can't. They're not food products.
Right. So you can't, but you don't have to pay sales tax on Coca-Cola. There's some strange things in federal and state regulations, but this is really aimed at trying to get some money in there with that they have discretion over.
And so when we're building our budget, we set aside the funds that would.
In the one time, for FY23, that's
23.
the $500,000.
You said just one time?
Yeah, the 500 is a one-time amount, and then FY24 impacts would be built in as the budget's built from the administration and comes through.
So in other words, the DCF needs money to reprogram these eligibility calculations.
Yes. And we heard this when we were talking about the child advocate office too, that this 500,000, I think it's the same one, is the first cube of 3 cube.
Oh, no, I think the child
That is
advocate
different.
is of the family services IT product,
Okay.
which is a different,
Different IT.
data. Yeah,
This one got the most discussion because it seemed like a lot. But apparently there's a whole bunch of different programs, and so you have to hire someone to reprogram all those programs.
Yeah, you do, and it's, the data, the programming language, there's few people that have the, knowledge anymore, because it's the old access system that's got to be, approved. So committee, we have a bill here that would provide a little bit more money. Obviously, the other connection, to reach up is that some reach up parents can't work. This helps people who are able to work. And in addition, they get the state earned income tax credit, which is refundable. But we have other parents or parents who are caring for children with disabilities who can't work. And so that little amount, if we're successful in getting the House to concur, that AABD increase that we had in SY10 would help those individuals with a little bit more increase on the state sub to their SSI benefit. So discussion about this bill. And you said we bought back the whole SSI.
Yes, we did that last year, the year before.
I know we phased it in, so we actually are done on that. So Senator.
If there isn't more in the way of discussion, I would move the bill in favor.
Representative Pugh had sent Senator Kitchell and Senator Cummings a note this morning about the effective dates and here, and I don't know if Katie had gotten the same.
If anybody sends me an email when we're in session,
Yeah,
we
I
are
have-
reading them.
I have not gotten
Because
my
we've been on the
emails this
floor
morning.
and, I haven't read that, Stephanie.
And we're confident, so.
It's changing the effective dates for sections 4, 5, 6, 7, 8A, 9, and 10 to something that says no later than January 1st, 2024. And I just brought it up because I was also included on email, but it doesn't look like Katie was.
What's the date now?
So,
The date now is a hard January 2024, I believe.
Can I leave you to work this out, because Senator McDonald is missing, and I have a committee
Yes.
that's running.
Please. And the vote was the vote in health and welfare is 500.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
so the way I read this, a child can still live at home or be, as long as they're in school until they're 22. They could continue to be a student and they could be paid up to $350 a month for attending. What's the section two?
No, they can be counted as a member of the household. So if you've got a family of 4 and they get $830 a month, if right now, as I understand it, if that child, after they turn 19, would have to be removed from the grant, which would go down to maybe $750.
Now they're gonna.
Now they can maintain that balance of that $830. They can continue to get the child's benefit as part of the benefit, as long as they're in school. What you're talking about is when a parent works, their income is there's a disregard, there's an incentive to work. And what they're doing is how you calculate the earnings. So as part of the grant determination is increase the disregard from 250 to 350. So it's a good idea. It's rewarding work. And when people work, you know that it's expensive. You've got travel, you've got a variety of additional costs. So no, so the 250 is a disregard of the parent's earnings, but the age is simply allowing that child to remain part of the assistance group through 20 to 22, as long as they're in school. So that's really good. Yeah. Any other questions?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a second. So our clerk will call the roll if there's no further discussion.
Senator Bell.
Oh, what about the effective date?
Well, Katie just mentioned that the proposal from Representative Pugh doesn't work. We need actually a specific, a date certain, as opposed to what she was proposing, which is on or before for an effective date. So,
We don't need to make any.
it doesn't sound like we should make any
Okay,
change based on that, right?
All right, so we have a motion that's been seconded, and we'll call the roll.
Senator Bell, Senator Baruth, yes. Senator Rivka,
Yes.
Senator Sears,
Yes.
Senator Starr,
Yes.
Senator Westman,
Yes.
Senator Kitchen,
Yes.
and Senator Kitchell reported.
No, Senator Westman has DCF. Unless you want me to do it.
No,
I think you can do it. If you want any help on how to calculate benefits, I can.
no, I can yield to you on the deal. If nobody asked.
I'm gonna grab Senator Honey.
Did we?
I'm gonna keep you here too for that.
I know, and I just want to spin out 7:15.
You wanna go to that first?
What time is it? You said
2 o'clock.
Ellen is going to be here.
2:04.
Ellen is available at 2.
Yeah, I want you to be available too. So do you want me to see if I can get her?
I really would, and then we'll go to the Office of Child, Youth, and Family Advocate.
Okay, let me see.
Because I'm not sure we can finish this one. We've got a number of questions in terms of just some of the logistics here. What Ellen is coming down for, and I'm sure people have been waiting for, and that is our discussion about H 715 and the extent to which we are relying on the Rules Committee or the way in which there is action on the behalf of the General Assembly relative to the implementation of the Clean Heat Standard. And so what I have done here, based on the concerns that were raised, and some people were very, had a lot of reservations about sort of that open-ended, go forth, create it, and not having some kind of subsequent legislative review. And I think for those of us who are on joint fiscal, many of our colleagues were very concerned about allowing a small group of legislators making decisions around, in this case, would be ARPA money, and we had, or CRF, and we had provisions, come with your proposal, and then we'll release the funds. So there was a check back. And so what this does is basically try to keep within the same time frame that was identified or developed in the bill, but making it clear that we are not expecting, nor is it, we feel, our due diligence to rely on the Legislative Administrative Rules Committee, LCAR, to make the determination that whatever is proposed by the PUC is consistent with legislative intent. So this actually adds, the amendment adds that the proposed rules to implement the standard cannot be done without the specific authorization of the act of the General Assembly. Now, how that is done could be through the budget adjustment, it could be through the budget process, it could be a separate bill, but there would be, there would have to be an affirmative action. So the timetable did have preliminary filing of review of rules. What this does is enter report on proposed framework. And so it's an advance of getting what is the thinking, what is the work underway by the commission. And then the other is by January 15th of 2024, that the commission would submit to the General Assembly the final proposed rules, but they aren't filing them with LCAR at that point. They're just saying, these are what we're proposing to be filed. That will give the committees of jurisdiction the opportunity to take testimony, review the rules, make modifications, and it will be done in a, hopefully in a very transparent and a very comprehensive way. Recognizing that there's APA can be 6 months in duration. There's part of it is that public notice. And so what number 2 does is notwithstand the public notice, because in fact, the whole legislative process and testimony would function as that opportunity for public input. And so that's helps to limit, the process between the General Assembly approval and a July 1. And so that's what that's intended to do. So Senator.
I'm looking at page 2, line 7. When it says, upon affirmative legislative act of the General Assembly, I read legislative
Thank you
act
so much.
as opposed to executive action, as one that we take without the governor needing to sign. Am I reading that correctly? So in other words, you mentioned we could do it in the BAA, that obviously would take gubernatorial signature. But for instance, when there's a new agency proposed or department by the executive branch, we take a vote in each chamber, and that makes it go forward. I'm reading this similarly, where each chamber could vote to approve the rules, and it would not have to go for a signature to the governor.
That isn't the way
I
it
think
should
we,
be.
I think that the structure by which that affirmative act takes place, I think we need to have our leg council talk about that. If the intent is to put forward a way of how can the legislature act affirmatively without being subject to a gubernatorial veto, is that in essence what you're asking?
Sure. I mean, that's one way to frame it. Another would be, in the original bill, it was going to go into effect automatically. We said the General Assembly should have the say. Are we then taking the next step and saying that the executive branch also has the say?
And I don't know what instrument, and we need to be clear on that. Thank you, Ellen. The question becomes one of,
Through the legislature that the government can,
This doesn't say a bill, this says a legislative.
This is just.
it's still legislation.
Well, that's the question. Is it legislation, or is it, for instance, could you have a resolution, joint resolution that would say?
I think, but I don't want to answer that. We've got Ellen here who drafted it. And the question really, in terms of how that legislative approval, what vehicle that might take, would be up to the legislature to determine. And it could be a resolution, I suppose.
Ellen Jakowski, Office of Legislative Counsel. While that is a possibility, if asked, I would advise against a resolution and advise that there be a bill passed or part of a bill, or have language passed in a bill addressing the issue. Having a resolution passed would potentially fall under what's known as the legislative veto. And so any actions by the legislature that are intended to have consequences upon rights of the people. So having some sort of tangible consequences should be constitutionally enacted and therefore go through by passage by both bodies and signing by the presented to the governor. So by not doing that, you risk what is known as a legislative veto, which is unconstitutional. And so, yes, I would advise that if an action in this scenario would potentially have very severe consequences, strong consequences, so I would advise legislative action in the form of a bill.
Well, then the question is, should this say, shall be in bill form?
Yes, it could be more specific if you'd like it to be.
Well, I just think affirmative legislative act is a little loosey-goosey in terms of what we're actually calling for.
Yeah, well, the question, it wouldn't have to be a freestanding bill. It could be, that expression or that authorization could be communicated, as I said, as a budget or budget adjustment. But all of that.
But still, even a budget or a budget adjustment is in
Yeah.
bill form.
All right, so upon affirmative action, I don't know, how it's, well,
on legislative.
I think inherent in that is that it has to pass.
What about upon passage of?
Well, why don't we,
legislation by
rather than
law?
attempting, shall we be, I have to say this was carefully worded by attorneys, for a variety of reasons. So before we start wordsmithing, I think we better, have the thinking, and I don't know if, Ellen, you wanna, this was Anthea's language, right? Because it's notwithstanding the APA.
Sure, yes, Anthea did help with the language on the APA. Were you looking in the first instance of amendment or in the third instance of
I am looking on page 2,
Number 2.
line 7.
Okay, because there is also language on the first page in the first paragraph.
Pro.
So the first instance of amendment is adding new statutory language to the chapter on the clean heat standards, so that there is a statutory provision in addition to the later session law provision, so that it's clear in the statute that notwithstanding any other provision of law, the PUC shall not file proposed rules or issue any orders without specific authorization by act of the General Assembly.
The word act there only refers to something that's a bill signed by the government.
Yes, although we could be more specific, you could be more specific with the language. You could say, for example, an act passed by the General Assembly and enacted into law in accordance with the Constitution. That's the floor amendment that was in the House used that language. So you could be more precise.
I have to say, I think we should, because otherwise we're gonna have a long running argument.
What did it mean?
In the lead up.
Well,
You have it clear so people understand.
I don't know, are we parsing too much here in terms of without specific authorization by act of the General Assembly?
And I would say it's implicit in this because this will be a statutory provision. And in order for the PUC to move forward, this statute will need to be either repealed or amended. And so that's why it is sort of implicit in this. You could, however, be more specific.
I think the more specific you are, the better, because I think the courts, if they're asked to intervene, would want to know what was the legislative intent. And so I believe the legislative intent is to have a new bill signed by the governor based upon whatever rules that the Public Utilities Commission comes up with. I've seen it on some minor bills that we passed last year, where one judge in Windham County says, oh, this wasn't clear. Was it meant to be retroactive or not? That was the midpoint probation. Right. So we went back and rewrote it to make it clear, yes, it's retroactive.
So it seems like if we're talking about changing that, there should be maybe consistency of the terms between sections. I'm looking at a little bit different wording, but perhaps it's good to keep whatever language we agree upon, make it consistent with rulemaking, and then in one, for example,
Well, I think rulemaking may be the wrong, to propose legislation that would propose legislation that would, put into effect whatever rules are developed. Is that what they would do?
Well, rules have the force of law, as we know. So I think the purpose was to have the opportunity to look at the rules before they're filed, and then say that's consistent with legislative intent, or this needs modification, and or whatever actions, and then the legislature would have to vote. There would have to be a vote.
You do that before rules.
You would, and that's what this does here, is before it would go to rules, and we're like, how can you file rules without that look, whatever you want to call it, check back, look back, but it's a way of saying this is new frontier. We are kind of in a new era. We don't know what the collateral impacts will be in terms of, how you mitigate the impact on households with lower incomes. Will that require greater financial aid, et cetera? So this is designed to have the legislature fully understand what the rules would require and in advance of their going to LCAR, which they can't make a decision. Their decision has to be, this is consistent with legislative intent. So as Senator Sear said, the less clear that is, the more difficult it is, or the more you open it up to dispute. So Senator Westman.
So on line 11, would it be clearer if we just said by statutory act of the General Assembly?
I don't know if they.
That would be by statute, would that be in bill form?
I don't know. I think we probably need to have legal thinking about what is the best words to use. Rather than our attempting to say, how about this, or whatever.
Right, for example, I would propose without specific authorization enacted by the General Assembly in accordance with the Constitution.
Well, one would hope that we would not be doing something that's contrary to the Constitution.
I agree. And also,
But maybe enacted is a good term,
okay,
because that assumes you've
Yeah.
deliberated and you've made a decision.
Because this is going to be controversial when it happens.
Well, I think that starts on line 16, number 2. On or before October 1, 2023, the committee will submit to the General Assembly an interim report on the proposed framework of implementing. I think that what's confusing is we are using the term rules, and we're really talking about a law. So the framework of legislation is probably better than rules, in my opinion. They can then develop, but we're not asking them to develop rules in this amendment, are we?
The other.
But that's where the confusion's gonna come in. Because rules are generally, it goes to the Administrative Rules Committee. There's certain, you can only.
But in this case, they can't file. They can't file what they're proposing.
Understood, but that's where it's confusing.
It is confusing because normally we would have a draft bill, and this bill is coming to us. And what we're basically, without this, then the bill was reading that they would go forward and file their rules with LCAR. And we're basically saying, wait a minute, before we get to the point of filing, we want to have that legislative review and authorization. And whether we use the word enacted, I think is better, but it is an anomaly, I agree.
Yeah, so then the real key is whatever we write in line 11.
Enacted, that
Yeah,
seems to be a good term.
Enacted by the General Assembly.
Maybe you could restate that, it sounded really good, Ellen.
implementing the clean heat standard without specific authorization enacted by the General Assembly.
Authorization
And
enacted by the General Assembly.
Does that mean signed into law by the government?
yes, and also because that statute 8129 will need to be repealed. So that language will need to be changed.
Yeah, because you don't
Yes.
have a rulemaking authority until you've gotten the
Yeah.
authorization.
It's really, it's not how we normally do it, but this is how we're kind of operating within the language used in the bill that came over. But I think without specific authorization enacted by the General Assembly. And then in the other sections, we want to use final rules until on line 5.
Yeah.
use the same,
So I'm sorry to complicate things.
feel free.
On line 10, we talk about
Page one.
the proposed rules will be approved and enacted.
More crows.
Oh, yeah, we got anti-crow and pro-crow.
I don't know, program. So on line 10, we've got proposed rules. Then down below, we've got proposed framework of rules. So
Well,
it's not,
maybe proposed is not the right. In other words, what we want here is an interim report on the development. Maybe that's it, or an interim report on the framework. How about the framework? Get rid of proposed on the.
well, I think for me, the question is the legislature approving a framework, which will be different from.
No, what it is, it was sort of like an interim report on what would, and, give you some idea of what would be in the, final proposed rules. So I think the word proposed here might be confusing, because we've got proposed rules and we've got proposed framework, and what it was an interim report, that would reflect, the development of the, work by the commission.
You're in number one on line 3, you're saying final proposed rules, and you want that same in the 8129 section?
So
The
we
proposed
don't
rules,
want them to file any
Any rules.
proposed
That's right.
rules. And there are different types of proposed rules in the APA. And so I did have Anthea assist in drafting this. So there's a distinction between proposed initial rules and proposed final rules. Are two separate things. So one is to indicate they can't file any proposed rules, whether initial or final.
That's what you're doing at 8129.
Yes.
But then where does proposed framework of the rules?
Well, that's maybe, proposed framework isn't the right term. It's an interim report that it would give the committees of jurisdiction some idea about the work that's being developed.
the proposed rules implement the standards, and the PUC is instructed to create the standards.
An interim report on, it's really an update of where are you on the work, what, some sense of what you think you're gonna recommend, so that when you get the final version, it isn't just a complete surprise. So that's what number 2 is about. It's sort of that
How about
interim.
an interim report on the creation of the rules implementing.
How about just on the proposed rules?
Sorry?
It just, on the proposed rules implementing. Is there an interim report on the proposed rules?
Well, what I heard the chair saying was, give us a report on your progress, which might not be yet the proposed framework. But I think it's just not quite clear to me what the timeline
Well, it
is.
could be an interim report on the development of the clean heat standard or something like that.
That's better. Interim report on the development of clean heat standard.
The clean heat standard.
That's great.
Right. That's why it needs so much.
I know, you get extra money for being chair. If you were in New York.
Maybe you see the pretty
Or about it.
All right, and so, and then we would also make any of the other sections sort of the same language here. Shall not file until the General Assembly, without specific authorization enacted by the General Assembly. We'll just keep that. The more we make the language the same, I think the safer it is. And then,
I mean, I don't think it'll hurt to leave line 17 as is, because it's just it's like first framework of what they're gonna look like. They'll get feedback. They'll go,
no, I think we've just gone circular, haven't we?
I suppose.
So right now, we had left it, we would modify an interim report on the development of the clean heat standard.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. as we've gummed that one to death. I don't know if the pro tem wanted to be here to vote on this as well or not. If not, I can double check. Do you want to just make those few changes and then we'll, but do you want to feel free to vote just knowing the changes, or do you want to see them? It's to, without a specific authorization enacted by the General Assembly. And then line 17 would be an interim report on the development of the clean heat standard. And then we would simply make the other section on page 2, the commission shall not final proposed rules without specific authorization enacted by the General Assembly.
Probably not a bad idea. Steve.
Yeah. Okay. So why don't we wait for Ellen to just make those changes and come back? And you might want to check with Carol. Okay, Becca's available. If not, we can move this.
10, 15 minutes? 10?
Yeah, okay, that would be fine. All right, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we've moved page 464, so that one is done. Boards and commissions, we're going to amend.
I have 265.
Oh, thanks. And then we've already done judiciary, that's done. Clean heat standards about ready to go. And then we have 265, which is the Office of Child, Youth, and Family Advocate. So what time is it now?
It is it's 2:30 exactly.
Okay. I'd like to at least have run through while Senator Sears is here.
Okay. So.
Let me get Senator Hardy.
Thanks.
All right, let me get you copies. And I will grab Senator Hardy. Oh, thank you, Nora. Do you need copies?
Yeah.
I made a copy of what I got from Katie, but I didn't keep it. Do you have it?
Let me see if he's.
I don't think so. I think our board hits 100. That was just an example.
You actually did forward it to my email.
I did?
You did not.
No, you copied, we copied it. remember?
Yeah, we printed it.
Yeah, somebody in the.
That's what I meant.
Yeah, so you want me to log in if you want to do that?
Well, he can't. Well,
You logged in, I haven't signed out, so.
Well, I sent you out, logged in as a post, make some work, so.
You want my number, if you want. Yeah, it's Jay Kitchell, as you know. And for,
Pretty embarrassing. On the other hand, people usually come.
that's my factor to get into my email.
They want to be.
Yeah, actually, I'm almost.
Yeah.
What?
I would check this
On
out.
that page, I wouldn't be on.
Hi. We are going to take up now H265, an act relating to the Office of Child, Youth, and Family Advocate. And we do have a fiscal note, and I think we have, as we run through this, we probably have some questions, and there may be some other pieces related to how does this get implemented. We're saying we created it. I don't know, maybe we're missing it, but oftentimes the commission would hire the executive director. That's normally what happens. And but somebody has to convene the first meeting of the commission. Sometimes we've had, we've even had the Chief Justice do that sometimes, depending on the nature. So and perhaps that's addressed in terms of how this would actually take it from the desire to create to what would be that process.
Right.
And looking back at the creation of the Ethics Commission, there was actually in Stephanie looked it up for me, was language to kind of how you operationalize the startup. So that was just one question, but why don't we have you run through the bill?
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, I'm Senator Ruth Hardy from the Addison District. And my head is thinking about health insurance markets right now. So now I'm gonna have to refocus on child and family youth advocate. So H265 creates the Office of the Child, Youth and Family Advocate. To answer, I mean, I'm assuming you have Katie McGlynn here to go through the bill, so you don't want me to go through the bill in depth, I was assuming, but I'm happy to do that if you want. But to answer your question about how it would be created, there was a lot of discussion both in the House and in the Senate Committee on Health and Welfare about where this office should reside, and who the person should report to and how it would sort of function within state government. There was definite consensus that it should be independent, so not sort of under the purview of the Secretary of AHS or the Commissioner of DCF or anybody like that, but sort of outside of the purview of the agencies and departments that they may be looking at, but still, and then some people thought it should be like the healthcare advocate and be part of a separate entity. The healthcare advocate, as you know, is in the Office of Legal Aid. And we looked at models around the country of where these offices are located. Most states do have some kind of child advocate or ombudsperson or something. Most of them have similar duties, variations on the theme, but similar duties. Most of them are independent. A few of them are completely outside of state government, like Maine is, but most of them are within state government in some way. So we left this within state government and didn't choose to go outside like the healthcare advocate, and sort of saw it more like the director of racial equity, sort of outside of a lot of the agencies that they might be, reviewing, but not completely outside of state government. So the person would ultimately be appointed by the governor with approval by the Senate, or review by the Senate, and there would be a commission, an oversight commission, and the members are named. It starts on page 11.
So let me,
Go ahead. Sorry.
the governor hiring, that's in.
Yeah, so that's the oversight commission starts on page 11, and the oversight commission, there's membership listed in the oversight commission, and this commission would recommend applicants for the position of the Child, Youth, and Family Advocate to the governor for his consideration.
So, this is kind of interesting. I mean, because we're looking at other entities, like, for example, Human Rights Commission.
Yeah.
And the commission usually hires the executive director. But in this case, you would have, and a racial equity, that office is actually hosted by Agency of Administration.
Yeah.
We wanted to have some independence, but they have all the administrative support.
Yeah.
By being attached. So we were struggling with where any administrative support would be provided here in that independent role, which you had a lot of testimony that was really key.
Yeah.
So if you have a totally independent, you would see the governor taking the lead then, and appointing the executive director, then with subsequent confirmation, I guess.
Yeah, there is the Senate confirmation.
And then, is there any administrative support?
Administrative assistance of the Agency of Administration, so that's at the bottom of page 12. Well, the commission has the administrative assistance of the agency administration. It doesn't specifically say where the office would have the administrative assistance, but, we imagined it could be like the director of racial equity and be in the agency administration, or it could be like the women's commission and be sort of more separate, or the human rights commission and be more separate. And frankly, we got a lot of different opinions about it, but since the governor would be appointing and it would be part of state government, presumably they could decide where they specifically wanted to put the office.
So it sounds like you're really looking to the agency of administration to take, after the governor does an appointment, to do the support for the office as well as the administrative work. Questions on that? Is it clear or?
No.
Okay. Senator Seer, you have a.
Well, I'm more concerned about what this thing is doing. I'm looking at page 7. The department shall notify the office within 48 hours of any fatality of a child or youth in custody. We have a fatality review commission that does that. Are you eliminating that commission?
No, so this wouldn't, this would be just a notification so that they would be aware that it was there and we had, or that aware that an incident had happened, a death had happened. We had the language that's there about the notification was the language that was suggested to us by AHS. Previously, it was a report and it was a lot more involved, and this was just changed to a notification.
And then secondly, the department shall notify the office within 48 hours to restrain or seclusion of any child or youth in its custody.
And
Does anybody have an idea of how many restraints happen in some of the placements of these children that are absolutely necessary on a daily basis?
so again, this language that about notification was sort of, we changed it in the Senate because before that it would have been a report. It was much more involved.
But I'm asking because some,
I wonder.
the severity of kids that are now in placement by DCF has resulted in numerous restraints on a daily basis. And you're talking, and I'm not talking out of school here, I believe you would see in some of the facilities that contract with DCF up to 300 a year of restraints. I don't know about seclusion because I don't know of any facility that has the ability to seclude. Woodside did, but the number of restraints there, I mean, the severity of the kids that these programs are dealing with today is much different than it was 15 years ago when I was working. And I've, remained in contact with folks who run programs. And that's one of their big frustrations, but they're well-trained in avoiding harming kids. I would think you would want to get a notification when a kid has been harmed by a restraint. But if this agency is gonna get, or this advocate, if 2 people are gonna get that number of incidents to investigate, I don't know how they're gonna do everything else.
Well, do you need a kind of data system to support the notification? I'm
I
not
don't think,
sure.
I think,
Are group homes are
well,
required
I
to
think
report this?
they do keep track, but it's on each kid. I don't, it's been a long time since I've done actual work in the business, but those, I'm proud of the fact that I only did 3 restraints in the 40-odd years that I worked. Kids today are much different, and the significant number of kids who have come in who are born of drug addicted parents who are in totally dysfunctional families. And are the complaints of those families going to be part of this, or is it the complaints? I got one letter from an advocate who wanted this because the complaints of the families who have their kids removed. And another one said, well, they want to make sure that there's a complaint when the kids stay with the family. Because the Desiree Sheldon type case. So
Yeah,
I
so,
think this is opening up a can of worms that we better know what we're asking this, is it the director and assistant director?
it's an advocate and a deputy
Assistant
advocate.
advocate,
Yeah.
yeah, two people.
So if I might, Senator Shears, I hear your concerns, and there's nothing in the bill that would require them to investigate every restraint, seclusion, or fatality. That's just a notification of them. And in large part, I think it's because one of the goals is to see, are there patterns, are there, looking at the data more broadly. If you go to the section on page 2 of the duties and authority, we in the Senate Health and Welfare Committee, we split up their duties to shalls and mays. And the first is work in collaboration with relevant parties to strengthen services for children, youth, and families. Analyze and monitor the development of and implementation of federal, state, local laws, et cetera, and review complaints concerning actions of the department of any entity. So it's just reviewing complaints and making appropriate referrals, and then only investigating those complaints where the advocate determines that a child, youth, or family may be in need of assistance from the office.
So I just wanted to ask, because this gets into something we've had some discussion here about, and that's what is intended here by investigate complaints. And I've heard people say, gee, we really need this office because of the Kern incident. And DCF didn't license that facility. It was licensed by AOE. AOE said they didn't have jurisdiction. And I've heard that said, well, this office would investigate. And then it raised the question, well, when you investigate and if you find in fact there's something that really would require criminal investigation, this office is not intended to have subpoena power.
Right.
So you have different levels of investigation. Depending on, well, judiciary deals with this all the time. So then what would happen would be this entity, this office, would not have, without subpoena power, would then simply say, we think that there's, as I understand it, it would be, then they would make a referral back to DCF to make a determination. But if your intent is to say, we want this office to have the authority to investigate those allegations that occurred in Manhattan, but they happened in St. Joseph's as well. A lot of them are a long time ago. Was that part of, I guess we're trying to understand what the committee intends this office to do. And if they engaged in an investigation, they don't have investigators like the Human Rights Commission or DCF does, or the Defender General, or the AG's office. Was it envisioned they would make appropriate referrals to where?
Yeah, so I mean, if it did require criminal investigation, clearly they would, refer it to the appropriate law enforcement agency or investigator.
And I just had an interesting discussion with Attorney Clark of the AG's office. And it's like, gee, well, the only two entities that can take criminal action is state attorneys and the AG. And so how would that work? And she was going to go back and just talk about the mechanics of something like that. What is it, 3 o'clock?
It's
Okay.
10.
Oh, because I noticed we're doing committee of conference here at 3.
Oh, well,
Um,
and I beg your pardon, but I think we will be late. We're still on the floor in one of our conferences reporting a bill, so. All the time.
All right, you're the purveyor of good news.
If that's good news, because time on this end means time on the other end.
Yeah, that's true.
So I'm just wondering on, with regard to 3207 still, when there's a complaint about child abuse, if by law, the education department, the school has to refer,
Yes.
not to this place, but to DCF. And then depending upon what the allegation is like, they would maybe.
So why
likely go out with the
didn't
police.
DCF investigate Kern Hatton?
I think they did, right?
They did, but then Kern Hatton either
Gave up their
voluntarily or under
Right.
pressure gave up
Gave
their
up their
license as a residential treatment center.
Right.
And then the result was there was no license, so there was nothing for DCF to investigate. And the Department of Education had, as I understand it, was involved because they have an education program, but DOE said they're not into that type of regulation, they only regulate the education. So nobody would be regulating them in terms of the conditions that children were living under. And but this is, as I understand it, is only contemplated for kids who are in DCF custody.
That's why I'm wondering, how would this work with the school? In other
That,
words,
or am I misreading it?
It's beyond that, it's for children and youth and families in the state of Vermont to the beginning section.
Well, I'm just wondering about on this, okay, so if you say all children, that's a little different than I'm saying just DCF. I'm thinking of with regard to schools, when it's a school, even a young child, if a child is totally out of control, you know, they can use and do use passive restraint, you know, which is all legal, proper, trained, only certain people can do it, you know, to have a child get themselves under control again. And so I'm wondering, is this only if they're harmed as a result of it, or is it any kind of use restraint? And
Are you back to Senator Sears' question about?
Where are you in the
I'm
bill?
on-
I'm sorry.
I'm on page 7 at the bottom. I'm just
Yeah.
wondering,
That was
our
my
schools,
question.
our schools, you know, young children, Dick's talking about older children, but I'm talking about younger children who you might use a proper passive restraint to calm them down for absolutely wild and crazy.
But I think the department being referenced there is DCF.
Yeah,
not
that's the department,
education.
the incidents and fatalities reports, that's
Only children in DCF?
Yes, that's only DCF.
So this,
It doesn't include schools.
I think what we're struggling with is if there's an expectation that somehow the authority of this office to deal with the current Hatton situation, does that authority need to be made more explicit? And then what do they do about if they had a finding that would suggest that there was criminal, that in fact further legal action was warranted? Would they refer it back to DCF?
they have to, that's the law.
Well, they do, except then there's a wrinkle here. And that is, I don't know whether Kern Hatton, when it was licensed, whether in fact for DCF, were they using Medicaid dollars? And if they are, Medicaid fraud in the AG's office, I don't know if the committee discussed the relationship between Mafusco and this office, because any provider receiving Medicaid dollars is subject to investigation, and they have investigators in that unit for anything to do with abuse or maltreatment or exploitation of Medicaid beneficiaries. So there is another investigatory authority at work here for many of these programs, because the group homes are all Panamide and they're therefore being reimbursed under Medicaid.
So we did not, Madam Chair, talk about that
connection with Medicaid investigation. That didn't come up in testimony. So, Yeah.
This is just DCF kids, that's where I don't understand how they could.
They were from current hat.
Well,
And the
no,
only
Current
reason,
Hat was under
Was.
DCF. It no longer is.
the only thing that I just seem to be, people are reading this or have different expectations about these, what these two people, what are they able to do?
Yep.
And being clear in terms of, what authority and what they can, what they would be able to investigate and what level of investigation does that really entail?
Yeah, and when we, if I might, Senator, when we got the bill from the House, it was much broader and included a lot of sort of systematic, looking at the system as a whole and making recommendations about the system as a whole. And DCF and HS were not pleased with that as much because they were like, we are looking system-wide. So we tried to narrow it more, so that it was more looking at keeping an eye on the system stuff, but more focused on more individual things. And we made the difference between what they shall do and what they may do and tried to narrow the scope of what they were doing. If you have suggestions for how to make it more clear, I think, we would be open to that. But the intent was to have the office have the ability to, like the name says, really advocate for children who are involved in the system who may not be getting the services or the attention or the treatment that they need or deserve, or because they had a negative interaction with the system.
Okay, so this is really, when you're looking at in the protection and juvenile justice systems, you're really talking about the courts, you're talking about Defender General, you're really talking about all the component pieces of receiving services and those involved in child protection and juvenile justice.
Yes, the crows.
Well, thank you.
It's the day of courage.
Thank you.
You can tell what's important.
We need like half marks. Pro, anti-pro. And we did hear from the Defender General with specific recommendations on language. And
Was that about the attorney-client relationship?
It was about, the first thing was about wanting to make sure that we kept the language. I'm gonna try to remember, we got a lot of feedback on this bill, as you would imagine. They wanted to make sure we kept the language of analyze and monitor the development and implementation of federal, state, and local law and regulations and policies related to youth and family and welfare, and recommend changes when appropriate. They wanted that language. They also, in the office, I think there was one of the sentences in the establishment language they wanted to make sure we kept, and there was a third smaller thing, I believe, about the commission or something like that. So we did hear from them, and we took their suggestions for language, and they're included in the bill. We got a lot of testimony from the department and from the agency and from advocates. And we tried to, as I said, narrow it as more and narrow the scope of the duties because it seemed a little overwhelming at first, and it still is a lot to take under one office. We heard from New Hampshire and their Office of the Child Advocate and their Child Advocate and what they do in New Hampshire. And one of the things that they really wanted Vermont to have one of these offices, because when children are going between states and they age out of the system in New Hampshire and they're Vermont children doing something in New Hampshire, then New Hampshire felt like often it's unclear what happens to that kid because there's not good communication. So we are the only New England state without an office of the child advocate, and so there's a lack of communication, or at least that was their testimony, between states and Vermont.
Well, I would think that's a reflection on the system. That should be what the caseworkers should help coordinate, but apparently that's not happening.
Yeah, that was just the testimony we got, and then we heard from, we got information from the education, the NCSL, I believe, about what other states do and how many other states have child advocates, and it's more than half have child advocates.
Well, I just want to be clear. I don't, and obviously some people have concerns. It's not to say this is a good idea or doesn't have merits. We're trying to sort out the details and the expectations, because obviously what we're seeing is symptoms of an under-resourced system.
Yeah.
And that's why we wanted to support parent-child centers and start getting more people in to help serve and support families. But also we wanted to be clear on expectations. I mean, people are saying, well, we need an advocate because social workers don't call back, or the Defender General, their attorneys are there and they don't meet with the families until just an hour before the hearing. All of those are symptomatic of, a system that's either under-resourced or having trouble with workforce.
Right.
Or, so if you're looking at, I don't know what the volume of petitions or cases before the court, but if they're 900 to 1,000 a year, the potential for, in addition to every restraint coming in, it's sort of like, well, what does that look like in reality? And and that we don't want to set up an office in such a way that we're creating expectations around what two people are able to accomplish. And it's probably they're not going to be able to address all of those. But the question also becomes one of being clear on the responsibility. And if this doesn't and never was intended to deal with the current Hatton, then we need to say that's a different issue, and that's not something that we think can be. Or we say, yeah, we did intend to it, and how do we make that more explicit? So that's where we're kind of.
Yeah, and I completely agree, Madam Chair. I think we want to make sure it's explicit, and we tried to get it more clear from what we got, and the bill came over to us last spring, so we've had it for a year, and we did clarify some of the language about, and if I can find it, about talking to kids in facilities, and let's see if I can find it, about when the advocate could talk with kids and when they could enter a facility. I see Katie up there. I'm not sure, Katie, you remember where that is in the bill?
Well, I think really we're going to have to have you come back, Ruth.
Okay.
And maybe we can refine some of our questions or look at how we, maybe want to make some areas more explicit. Let me just ask you, did the Health and Welfare Committee talk about how to deal with a situation such as current Hatton, and with the intent that this office would take the lead role responding?
The intent was that this office would be able to look into a situation like current Hatton, especially since DCF and AOE sort of reached a dead end with their ability to deal with that situation because of the various.
But we could have children that are in independent, private programs and schools that would perhaps complaints around how the treatment could come forward that aren't in DCF custody, may not even be, I don't know, the DOE licensed educational program. And
Kids that are in the Department of Mental Health, though, are not covered.
They're not explicitly covered. And if you, Madam Chair and Chair of Judiciary, have ideas for how to make it more clear, I think, I can't speak for the entire Health and Welfare Committee, because this is how we passed it out, but if it's not clear to you, it's gonna, it's problematic, so I'd be happy to work with you on an amendment, or look at an amendment that you have to offer. We want it to be clear, and we want it to be doable. We also heard testimony from other child and youth advocates that the offices kind of evolved as they got started, and said this was the original focus of the office, but after a few years, it was really clear that this should be where they were focusing their time. And, so that kind of evolution did happen. A lot of the language about confidentiality and all of that is directly similar to the other advocate offices we have, the health advocate, the long-term care ombudsman. So we looked at those offices as sort of models for those kinds of
Access to information.
Yeah, and there's also access to the data systems, so that they would have access to the data and be able to look sort of more broadly, like the original, at more systematic changes. So, is 300 kids being restrained too many, and is that a systematic issue, or is that just an issue with the severity of cases that we're seeing, and sort of how can that?
Does DCF capture that information?
They are in this right now, updating their data system, and they have money, I believe, in the budget for updating the data
One
system.
of the first phase.
Yes, the first phase.
They have to, every restraint has to be reported to DCF, but I don't know how frequently that is. This says within 48 hours, but it's, I don't know that there's a system that does that rapidly. But I do know that the Defender General, and I always get this one wrong, the Defender General has a unit. They obviously were involved in the Woodside investigation and complaint, but there's also, all I can think of is that Pigman's outfit. And it's
DCIO.
Yeah.
No, not DCIO,
Office of
Disability Rights.
Disability Rights, which gets involved in investigations, and they're the ones that took the Woodside case to judge the federal court. And in the federal court decision, Judge Crawford said that kids who had significant emotional trauma should not be at Woodside. What that created was, there's a huge problem between the Department of Mental Health, in my opinion, between the Department of Health and DCF. And that problem is that kids become aggressive because of their psychological problems, assault someone or do damage, then become delinquents in custody when they really should be in mental health. No different than in the adult system, you have people who have significant mental health issues that end up in our prisons. And that's what's being repeated. That's where I think things like Broward Retreat come in. There should be a nexus between the Department of Mental Health in here and the Department of Children and Families. And I think you'll find in many of these cases, you have programs being asked to deal with kids that they're not designed to deal with because of the mental health issues and because of the lack of placements within the mental health system. So that's for the more, the older group, and Senator Nitka was talking about a younger group that mental health is trying to deal with mobile crisis units.
And they have a program at the retreat. I'm assuming it's still in existence for young children. It's a separate house. But that's for really.
But,
Yeah, and I think
so I'm not sure, I'm not necessarily against this. I just don't think it's got enough money to it. Honestly,
No, I think we'll all agree 120 is the camel's nose.
because they're not,
In terms of
who's
what's
gonna,
needed.
Yeah, and that's a half-year number, because it starts January 1st. The
well, I
commission
mean,
is appointed first, and then the executive director or the advocate comes in
This
January.
reminds me of the starting a division of racial equity or whatever we call it.
Yes.
With one person, soon finding out that one person can't do that job. I think you're gonna,
I actually looked at the budget for the Human Rights Commission, it was about 800,000.
Yeah, and I think that the director of racial equity is a good
model in terms of, that office has evolved a lot since we started it, and she's taking on a lot more things, and this probably would
But
too.
it's also within the agency of administration, which provides some administrative
Right.
help.
And I think that's where this probably would end up, and, the connections to DMH and to, as Senator Nick has said, to AOE and the schools. On one hand, I agree that they should be made more explicit, and on the other hand, the more connections you make, the broader the office gets, and so it's sort of, with, trying to narrow it and make those connections at the same time sometimes can be difficult, but if you find an elegant way of doing that, that would be.
Okay, thank you. So I just want to say on page 8, you see what they're entitled to do in terms of accessing facilities, and that's page 8.
Page 8, thank you, Senator Nika, that's what the place I was looking at. And that language we also clarified because it was much more murky. I'm happy to come back anytime at your convenience and work with anybody on improving the bill. And thank you for your consideration.
Well, obviously, we've been looking at it and it raises a variety of questions about connection points and scope and authority and also exactly what would be analogous, and maybe racial equity is better if that's independent. It is attached to an agency as opposed to totally independent.
Right.
So that seems like at this point, there's still a lot of connections to the administration, particularly if the governor's appointing. So that's helpful and clarifying.
Yeah, and we did hear from the director of racial equity, and she advocated for it being independent, but didn't say put it here nor there. So she's a good person to talk to about it as well.
Thank you.
Thank you all very
Don't need
much.
to rush, but we have a bill
No,
that
it's
we
okay.
might get out. And
I
we have
understand.
the pro tem here to vote, and it's our would be our amendment. 8768. Thank you, Ellen. You want to come back and so the first, you've actually shaded, so it's very helpful to draw our attention. So we'll just have you run through this. And Senator Ballard, do you have a copy of it? Okay, great. Of the final enacted and so.
Sure, so on page 1, in the first instance of amendment, the language has been amended so that it reads, notwithstanding any other provision of law to the contrary, the commission shall not file proposed rules to the Secretary of State or issue any orders implementing the clean heat standard without specific authorization enacted by the General Assembly. In the second instance of amendment, the interim report language has been changed, that it's on and before October 1, 2023, the commission shall submit to the General Assembly an interim report on the development of the standard. And then finally, in the third instance of amendment on page 2, enacted has been added twice in the final rule section. So the commission shall not file the final proposed rules with the Secretary of State unless specific authorization is enacted by the General Assembly to do so. And then notwithstanding some of the sections of the Administrative Procedures Act, upon affirmative authorization is enacted by the General Assembly upon affirmative authorization enacted by the General Assembly authorizing the adoption of the committee standard, the commission shall file. So yes, is should be struck on line 7. Apologies.
Yeah, okay.
We're fortunate to have it.
Yeah, we are. He's good, he's got a red pen. So committee, does that capture our discussion on making it clear?
Good.
Thank you very much, Ellen, for doing this.
I don't feel any.
So,
Roll call or anti?
These are pro-growth.
Roll call?
There are pros and cons. Just pro.
so we have a motion, is it Senator Baruch?
I think it was Bob.
No, oh,
No,
No.
No, I need.
Senator Westman, sorry, Senator Westman's move of the amendment, that would have this.
I'll second it.
Seconded by Senator Sears. Further discussion? Otherwise, we'll call the roll.
Senator Ballin,
Yes.
Senator Burris, yes. Senator Nitkin,
Yes.
Senator Sears.
Yes.
Senator Starr,
Yes.
Senator Weston,
Yes.
and Senator Kitchen.
Yes.
Sure.
So now we need a motion to move the bill favorably. As
We
amended.
need to do it.
Okay, Senator Westman. Favorably as
I'll
amended.
second it. Started one.
Senator Ballin,
Yes.
Senator Burris, yes. Senator Nitkin,
Yes.
Senator Sears.
Yes.
Senator Starr,
Yes.
Senator Weston,
Yes.
Senator Kitchen.
Yes.
And the report,
Well, it's Alice's, section. You have natural resources?
Yeah.
Okay. Reggie's on natural resources, so I think it's between,
No, I voted no in committee. I will vote for the bill if this amendment makes it on the floor of the Senate. But, being in the position where I voted no.
I think that
in
Senator Zivka has that section of the budget, so we will make her the reporter.
But I want to make clear that I could not vote for the bill without this.
Well,
I couldn't have either.
well, I voted no in committee when it came without it. I will say that what this strikes directly at is in the bill that creates the standards, and I think you did a very good job drafting this. I'm sorry. The line is that the Public Utility Commission shall adopt rules and may issue orders to design and implement the clean heat standard. And that's the point where this committee, I think, if on the mark, it will come back to deal with the design and implementation of the clean heat standard.
I think the other thing that is important too is we have discussion with Bill and people were expressing, it's the level of due diligence and involvement, colleagues have said, anything that's developed should be of such quality that it can, withstand, I don't know, but, would, give the necessary satisfaction of what is moving forward. And this is complex and the collateral impacts are probably, we haven't even begun to think of them all. So I think this is reflective of the desire, and it may not be an easy position, it may not be an easy vote in the future, but that it's one the legislature itself has to take and be informed and understand exactly what these standards will mean when implemented. So
I think what people are concerned with is the price that they would have to pay for heating oil and other things if this is implemented. And the fact that they've never, regulated fuel oil dealers.
there's a lot of uncharted territory here.
And frankly, in my neck of the woods, a lot of the fuel oil is delivered by out-of-state companies, and probably yours too. We've got a lot of New Yorkers who.
Well, Dead River is over your way now.
Yeah. So I don't know how they get affected.
Well, those are all the questions that this would have to address. And so I think one of the things that people would say, is that if we want the bill to move forward in concept, this committee is allowing it to happen by adding this amendment to give the sufficient comfort to move it favorably. So I think that's the important message here is in order to have the committee act favorably, it's with this addition.
It's actually, in my view, having sat through all this, I think this committee, if they're successful in getting this amendment, just save this bill.
so, has natural resources.
Yeah.
Yes, I did share the amendment with the chair earlier. It was before we made these tweaks, but we haven't changed it in substance. I'll share the final version, but he had a chance to review it, and Senator Ballin part of that discussion as well.
Good.
Okay. Thank
Thank you,
you,
Ellen.
thank you very
And
much.
I'll send a corrected version straight to Liz.
All right, thank you very much. All right, so I guess 3:30, is it 3:30?
3:20.
All right,
Got
so,
a call that I could order up.
so we're gonna adjourn the meeting for today.